Hi, everybody. Welcome to English 247, late start. My name is Lillian Ruiz. I am the instructor for the class. And what I wanted to do today was just to review our syllabus and our course outline to give you a sense as to what it is that we will be doing over the course of the semester. Though I know that some of you might have already viewed it before this video, but I just wanted to talk about it with you. And then we can begin with the texts themselves next class. So I'm assuming you've got some familiarity with Moodle because you are watching this video. And you will see that on our Moodle site at the very top, we've got a section entitled General with several icons, and this is how you navigate the class. The first is entitled Syllabus and Other Documents. So if you were to open that, you would have a copy of the syllabus and the course outline, which is what I'm going to be talking today. So any handouts that I would normally distribute in a face-to-face class will be in that folder. And I usually recommend to students that you take hard copies of those. I think it's just easier to manipulate, but the choice is yours. Underneath that, you'll see a folder for past class sessions. So what you will see is the current week on our whole Moodle page. And each week I retire that week and I put it into the past class sessions, which means you can access it at any point over the course of the semester. But the most easily visible week is the current week that we are at. And then discussion forum, which is where you would be posting your responses to discussion forum questions that I'll be posting. More on that in a little bit. And then there are two optional possibilities, optional chat. And if it turns out you ever wanted to chat with your classmates or with me, you could open up that link and that would get you into the class chat. And optional Zoom. So if you were to click on that, that would give you my Zoom information. And if you look beneath that, you will see the notes that happen to be posted for today, which was basically our introduction. As I said, I wanted to review our syllabus and our course outline. And do note that I am not using the Moodle grading program, even though I am using Moodle. So if you turn to the Moodle grading program and it looks odd to you, it's because I haven't been using it. So if you ever have questions about your grades, just directly ask me. Don't rely on the Moodle grading program. So what I'm first going to talk about is the syllabus, which if you're looking at it now, and again, I recommend that you might want to make a hard copy of it, you'll see that at the top, I've just got some contact information. I've got my name, Lillian Ruiz. Most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal, but feel free to call me whatever you feel most comfortable with. My email, and you might notice that my email address is slightly different than the majority of email addresses on campus, in that my email address is purely my surname with no first initial. And the reason why is because when I started at GCC, it's hard to believe, we did not have an institutionalized email system. This was in 1993. I remember how excited we all were when we were given our email addresses, and then we quickly realized that issuing email addresses based on surname would lead to a lot of duplication, which is when the first initial was instituted, illustrating how little we really understood about this new technology. So if you see somebody with an email address that's just their surname, they've probably been at the school for a very long time. My phone number is there, which would get you to my phone in my office, and if I'm not there, you could certainly leave a voicemail. My office is in North 328A. It's in the Inclusion and Diversity Center, which is a physical space that's devoted for anybody who supports the ideals of inclusion and diversity. There's a little study area there, a kitchenette there, a little social gathering place there, and my office as well, if you ever wanted to talk to me. And my office hours, and I don't know how useful this will be for you as an online student, but Monday through Thursday, 9 through 10, or by appointment. So, moving on to the text for the class, the good news about the text is that you can use any edition that you would like. Obviously, your page numbers will be different, but the reality is that all of these texts are available not only in different versions, but they're also available online. And what I have done is I've provided the online links for these texts, but Again, I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I prefer paper. I think it's easier to annotate that way with paper. So if you wanted my recommendations, Signet is a very good recommendation for text. So is Penguin. And the text we are going to be reading this semester, The Awakening and Short Stories. We will be reading The Awakening, which is a novella, longer than a short story, but not quite as long as a novel, by Kate Chopin. And we'll also be reading one of her short stories. So we won't be reading the book in its entirety, but the Signet Classic includes both of those pieces as well as other pieces and is relatively affordable. Emily Dickinson we'll talk about in this class, and I had ordered Emily Dickinson's poems edited by Johnson, or another text. And when we get to Emily Dickinson, we'll talk about the importance of making sure that we are reading the original poetry that she wrote and not that which was edited, which was actually a crime, in my opinion. And the quick and easy way to find out whether you're reading original Emily Dickinson is, does it have a lot of dashes at the ending of the line and irregular capitalization. So the Johnson text is considered definitive, but I will also be providing you with links as well. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Persuasion by Jane Austen, with a note that it's assumed that you'll have a good dictionary thesaurus for reference. Not that I expect you to go out and buy dictionary thesaurus. I'm well aware that your computer programs are probably loaded with them. But having access to a dictionary or a thesaurus, which offers synonyms, words with similar meanings, but it allows you to be a lot more creative in your writing because you're not engaged in a lot of repetition. Both of those resources, just because you have access to them, it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually use them. So I encourage you to use them because in addition to reading, we will be doing writing in this class. But I'll talk a little bit about that, beginning with the course description. That this class is a study of works by women writers through the 19th century. And we discuss literature in various genres, heavy focus on novel, but we are also reading a little bit of short story and some poetry. And we discuss this literature within the historical and social context of the times, in relation to early literary movements, and from the perspective of a unique female literary tradition. There is a prerequisite for this class, what we at GCC call Comp 2, or Introduction to Literature, or something comparable at another institution. At GCC, we have 3 different versions of this class, English 112, 114, 116. They all accomplish the same goal, which basically is orienting you to the field of literary studies and the what we call 200 level English classes, because they're coded with the number 2 at the beginning, much like this course, is a more focused investigation of a particular time period or author or genre in literature. And for us, it's Women in Literature 1. In other words, female authors from the 1800s. So if you don't think you've got the prerequisite met, please reach out to me as soon as possible so we can talk about the best options for you. Under student learning outcomes, you'll see that the goal is to read, critically examine, and appreciate the literary voices of British and American women in the 19th century. Obviously, we can't read everyone, so we're focused on the Western tradition, which is pretty typical when it comes to literature, and again, what is possible within the confines of the time period that we have. To identify major themes and issues in 19th century women's literature. Even with the handful of texts we're going to be reading, you will see themes and you will see connections. To see the relationship between 19th century women's literature and our present day world, the idea of timeless and universal themes. As much as things have changed, they've remained the same as well. And to improve oral and written communication skills. I have that on all of my syllabi. I mostly teach English classes, but I also teach public speaking. I teach media classes. I'm the one who teaches the horror film class, if you're curious about that. So I listed this on all of my syllabi, regardless of the discipline. And that English 247 offers a general introduction to the content and techniques of 19th century women's literature. Representative literary works will be studied. This course emphasizes critical thinking, critical reading, critical writing, And that's a word we tend to use a lot in college, critical. And not as in being or offering criticism, but as in being analytic and asking questions and doing what I say toddlers do very well. They ask questions, usually why. And I've often argued that's the difference between high school and college. In high school, you learn what. In college, you grapple with the whys. And it's not necessarily always an easy answer. As a class, we will strive to appreciate the aesthetic and literary merits of 19th century women's literature. So obviously, this is an online class. So I try to duplicate as much as possible what I would do in a face-to-face class. And under the procedures, you'll see that I will be posting a video myself discussing the class material by the time our class would normally meet in person. So if we were meeting in person, we would meet on Thursday evening at 6 p.m. So you can expect that by Thursday at 6 p.m., you'd have a video like this one to view. And to be quite honest with you, I'm going to try to post before Thursday at 6, but certainly you can see that by each Thursday at 6, I should have a video. You have 48 hours to watch that particular video for the class and answer its corresponding attendance question, because I will be asking an attendance question at the ending of each of the videos. And that in our discussion forum is how I determine, quote, attendance, unquote, for the class. Certainly, if you need additional time to respond to that question, more than 48 hours, ask me. I'll be happy to grant you an extension. But basically, the idea is that this is trying to duplicate the class discussion that we would have in class. And I understand that some of you learn very well by being very engaged, and some of you by being more quiet and thoughtful. So in terms of the discussion forum responses, you are not required to respond to your classmates. You are certainly encouraged to. Much like you would do in a face-to-face situation, you're not necessarily required to participate in class, but you're certainly encouraged to. What you are required to do is to read all of your classmates' responses and my responses in turn, so you will see that I basically will respond to all of your responses. And all of that should basically duplicate what we might have talked about in a face-to-face situation. And again, as I indicated, this would count as your attendance for the class. And then any written graded assignments that we have, papers in the final exam, which I'll talk about shortly, will be ultimately submitted into me via my email. I request that because my email grading program works much better than anything through Moodle. And again, my email address is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. And I ask that you send it via PDF because of my grading program again. And I'll talk a little bit more today about papers and final exam, and I'll also talk about that in a moment. But you can see under course requirements, students are expected to complete all reading and writing assignments by the due date. That's really the best way to be successful in this class. Watch all the videos, do all the readings, answer all the discussion forums, and read all of the discussion forum responses. So, in terms of papers, there will be 2 out-of-class papers. One due approximately midway through the semester, so we would have had a chance to talk about text and how to write a paper. It'll be approximately 4 to 5 pages long, but as long or as short as it needs to be to support a position. And it will be on one of the texts that we are reading and discussing in class. It will be a critical paper, so I won't be asking for outside resources. And that first paper that's due approximately midway through the class, that would be devoted to one of the earlier texts in the semester, can be rewritten for a higher grade because I see it as a learning exercise. So you can submit it in and then I would return it to you. If you're content with your grade, well, then you're done with the exercise. But if you wanted to earn a higher grade, you could take my comments into account, incorporate them into a revision. If you need further direction, you could certainly reach out to me as well. And I ask that you hand in the revised paper along with your original with my commentary on it so I can compare and contrast. And you would get the higher of the 2 grades, which is really the way professional authors write, is they get a lot of feedback and a lot of editorial commentary. So I view, again, that first paper as the learning exercise. Your second paper, which would be due towards the ending of the semester and would be very similar in terms of length, 4 to 5 pages, very similar in terms of focus, a critical paper, so it would be analysis, you wouldn't be doing research. And it would be towards the ending of the semester, to the point that you probably wouldn't have an opportunity to revise it. There probably wouldn't be time. But if you take the first paper as a learning exercise, you wouldn't need to revise the second paper because you would have already learned how to write a paper. So then you could just basically utilize those skills with some of the later texts in the semester. That said, occasionally a student will hand in a paper early enough so that we can negotiate the possibility of the revision of the second paper, but it's not guaranteed. It is guaranteed for everybody writing the first paper, and you've got up until the ending of the semester to do that, so you've got a little bit of time. So the final exam, because I know once I mentioned that you were curious about it, will be an open book, open note final. This is not a class in memorization. It's a class in understanding and analysis. And it'll be an essay question exam, and you will have choice. And basically, in a face-to-face situation, you would have approximately 2 hours to respond to that final exam question. Obviously, we're not in a face-to-face situation. I would give you 24 hours to respond to that question. Not that I expect you to spend 24 hours responding to it. I would expect you to spend about 2 hours or so. And the best way to prepare for the final: watch all the videos, read all the class discussion forum responses, do all the readings. Because whether you realize it or not, I will be talking about the final over the entire semester. So basically, if you've done all of that, you can just synthesize everything at the end. And this is deliberate on my part. So let me talk a little bit about the Institutional Services Disability Statement, which you might be familiar with if it turns out that you are a returning student to GCC. But I still wanted to state that Greenfield Community College values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities. It's committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. Our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So if there are aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or to your accurate assessment or achievement, please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you might need a reasonable academic accommodation, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And you can see that their contact information is there. The section on attendance is fairly straightforward, that class activity and discussion is extremely important and cannot be made up. Thus, absences, which I count in terms of your responses to the discussion forums, will be negatively reflected in your participation grade, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we do have a participation grade. And while each case is different, anything more than one absence could lower your grade. So basically, you've got one absence over the course of the semester, no explanations needed, no justifications required. After that, though, certainly if there's an emergency or an issue that's preventing you from coming to class, keep me updated, and you're not going to be in class, and obviously. But the idea is that the discussion forum and the participation is just as important as any other element. So do speak with me if you're beginning to miss several classes. Consultations, as I indicated, you can meet with me with office hours. We can make an appointment. We can meet electronically or in person or some combination. The section on papers is mostly just about formatting. That papers are due on the day specified. The papers should be typed, double-spaced, 1-inch margins. I hope this sounds familiar from your previous English classes. But again, we'll talk about this in greater depth when we actually get to talking about the papers. I realize I'm giving you a lot of information. I don't expect you to remember it all. I just wanted to give you a kind of holistic overview of the semester as a whole. The pages should be numbered. It's always a good idea to do, and especially when you're handing in a hard copy because they could be out of order. Papers should also include a cover page. So that's just a separate sheet of paper that has the paper title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. Technically, a cover page is not required by the MLA, or Modern Language Association, which is the association that basically has determined the rules for writing in the humanities and the languages. What the MLA says is that follow the directions of your instructor. So the instructor, I am asking that you submit in a cover page, but the formatting isn't really that important. I always think it's a good idea to keep a copy of any paper for yourself. And I will be distributing paper assignments during the term. And you will also be able to create your own paper topic as long as you get that topic approved by me and is related to one of the works that we are studying in class. So you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind as the semester develops. And as I indicated, you all have the option of revising the first paper. It always makes sense to talk to me if you're thinking about a revision. I'm going to skip the section on plagiarism. We can talk about this next class and go to grading, the approximate percentages, which is probably what you're most interested in. 25% is participation, so this is a large component of your grade. And participation is basically attendance and in-class assignments and activities, discussing, or I should say, answering those discussion forum questions. So again, if you wanted to positively impact your grade, that's certainly one way to do it. The discussion forum is worth a significant amount. Paper number 1, that 4 to 5 page paper on one of the earlier texts we are examining over the course of the semester, is worth 25%, and you do have the option of revising it for a higher grade, and the first grade would just disappear. Paper number 2, due towards the ending of the semester, very similar kind of paper, but just on a different text, one of the texts from the ending of the semester or towards the ending of the semester, 25%. And 25% for that final examination, the open book, open note essay examination. For an A, excellent, B, good, C, satisfactory. And yes, I am aware that there are other letters that follow C in the grading schemata, but I prefer to just focus on those first 3, particularly on the first day of class. So if you were to continue looking at the syllabus, you'll see that I've got some criteria for essay evaluation. What is the difference between, let's say, an A being excellent, or a B being good, or a C satisfactory? So we'll talk about that more in depth as the semester progresses, but note that you've got that there. What I wanted to talk about next was the course outline. And again, this can be found in the syllabus and other documents folder. And again, I suggest that you take a paper copy of it. I've got a paper copy in front of me. Basically, this is the plan for what we will be doing over the course of the semester. With a couple of caveats, dates and assignments might be subject to change. These are my best guesses as to what we will be doing and when on a particular date. And things, of course, could change. However, we will finish everything by the ending of the semester. And ideally, though I know the world is not always ideal, readings should be done prior to the date indicated, which will make the videos that you're watching make so much more sense if you've done the readings ahead of time. And you can see that today's class is purely introduction. So I just wanted to introduce you to the syllabus and to the course outline. Next class, and I've provided links for this, is what I would normally hand out as a handout, an essay by Walter entitled The Cult of True Womanhood. And this serves as a kind of overview of the time period and the background of literature during this time period and how the female experience related to that. So I view this as kind of introductory, as well as the short story that I'm asking you to read, and it's entitled The Story of an Hour. And this is by Kate Chopin. You might have read this in another class. It's quite short. It's only about a page and a half long or so, but it is quite sophisticated, and I've always argued that the shorter it is, the more sophisticated the text probably is. If you've got a 400-page book, not every page has to be brilliant necessarily, but if you've got a 400-word short story, every word better be perfect. But we'll talk about how to analyze, and we'll talk a little bit about Chopin when we see The Story of an Hour in class. So what would be ideal is you would have this read before the 25th, so that we can actually begin with our novels in week 3. We are beginning with Frankenstein. I tried to put the novels in chronological order. You'll see that we've got a couple of weeks devoted to each novel, and what would be ideal, and again, I know that the world isn't always ideal, is that you would have read that novel during the first class that it's scheduled. You would have read that novel in its entirety. So as we are talking about it over 2 weeks, you are reading the next novel. But again, do the best you can with what you have. We have 2 weeks devoted to Frankenstein, the 2nd and the 9th of October. And again, I've provided a link. You can see that on your course outline where you can find Frankenstein if you so wanted to. The 16th and the 23rd is going to be devoted to our next novel, which happens to be Persuasion. The 30th is going to be devoted to Jane Eyre. It's the longest of the novels. In my mind, perhaps one of the more, I think, engaging of the novels. I think Persuasion is a shorter novel, but it moves at a slower pace, and deliberately so, and we'll talk about the reasons why. So we've got 2 novels we've got 2 classes devoted to Jane Eyre with a tentative due date of the 6th of November for your first paper number 1 due, with a note that says early papers encouraged. I basically have rolling deadlines for my papers that I would like that approximately halfway through the semester, you would have submitted in your first paper. So that's how I determined when that due date would be. However, you could certainly hand in your paper early. As soon as I submit, or as soon as I discuss the paper topics with you, though I do suggest that you might want to wait before you submit a paper until we've actually talked about that text in class, because I think it'll inform your writing. But we will talk about papers soon, so that certainly you could hand in your first paper before the 6th of November. And my suspicion is that your first paper would either be on The Story of an Hour, a short story, which is a different kind of writing than writing about a novel, which would be either probably Frankenstein or Persuasion. And my suspicion is that Jane Eyre would probably be more appropriate for paper number 2 because it sort of straddles the midpoint of the semester, though there's nothing to prevent you from writing on Jane Eyre. And note that after Jane Eyre, we move to Emily Dickinson's poetry. Because we're reading poetry, I've got just 1 class devoted to that. And then on the 20th of November, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, which is a shorter text. We'll talk a little bit about that text, which we've got about a class and a half devoted to it. And then we end with The Awakening. In other words, we end the way we began, by another text by Kay Chopin. But rather than a short story, The Awakening is a novella, which means it's longer than a short story, but it's shorter than a novel. So it's approximately 100 pages or so. So it's sort of in the middle. And then our final exam is posted on the 18th, which is a Thursday, and you would have 24 hours to respond to that and return it on the 19th. And this would be the very last date that you could hand in paper number 2, which would be based on the latter set of readings in the semester. Likely either Jane Eyre, Emily Dickinson, though writing about a poem is different than writing about a short story or a novel, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, or The Awakening. So this gives you a holistic overview of what it is we're going to be doing in the semester. And again, I don't necessarily expect you to remember all of this. Certainly you can reference it. So as the semester progresses. But I did want you to get a sense of what it is we're going to be doing. And as a late start class, we've started a little bit later in the semester, and I've accommodated for that with our course outline. So we're doing the same amount of work that we would do in a typical length semester. It's just a little bit more condensed than it normally would be. So what's left for today is our discussion forum question. Again, you have a discussion forum question at the ending of each of these videos. And it seemed to make sense to have a question in which you introduce yourself. So that's our discussion forum question, to introduce yourself to the class. Feel free to upload video or audio, but not required. And then what we will do next class is actually begin to talk about some of the texts, specifically The Cult of True Womanhood and The Story of an Hour. And we will also finish up talking about the syllabus. So with that said, I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next Thursday. Take care. Bye-bye.